Okay, and now we are wrapping up the morning with talking about practical challenges in blockchain projects with some comments from Ben Livshits. Great to have you here, Ben. Ben is chief scientist at Brave Software, author of over 100 academic papers and dozens of patents. And you say this talk is a call for faster maturation in this space. And you will introduce some pitfalls in token creation and solutions like a future library of reusable design patterns for token economics. So thank you for being here, Ben. Looking forward.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. It's a wonderful selection of topics so far. And my hope is that this talk will be sort of gently transitioning us into the rest of the afternoons, into some of the topics that you'll see in the workshops, things of that sort. But what I'll talk about today tries to bring a bit of a software engineering perspective to this field. It's the emerging field of token engineering. So I wanted first and foremost to draw an analogy between what we've seen in smart contracts, which is an area that has been around for, well, a few years, right? And so there have been some wonderful things emerging from there. And certainly we've seen some pitfalls as well. So among those, we've seen some fairly major disasters, and I'll spend a few minutes talking about them just because there are some interesting lessons hiding for us there. So some of the takeaways here is that, well, it really helps to test and verify things before bad outcomes, before disasters are allowed to take place. But so let's get to that one step at a time. So here's a couple of things that motivate a lot of the work that's been happening on trying to improve the quality of smart contracts, trying to validate them, trying to verify them, so on and so forth. So the first one goes back to 2016, and I'm sure most of you have heard about this in some way, shape, or form. So this is the infamous Dow Hack, June 17, 2016, and basically that hack led to 3.6 million ETH being stolen, which was about $70 billion at the time, and actually a fork of the Ethereum blockchain, and a lot of soul searching on the part of the community that was involved in the DAO, and those obviously were not involved in this as well. So this is the first one. 2016, mid-year. The second one is the parity wallet bug, 2017, about a year later. And so basically it's got to do with some issues with the parity multi-sig library. And there was, again, quite a lot of soul searching. There was a proposal that was put forward to try to rescue those frozen wallets, and nothing really has come out of that. So there's quite a lot of money sitting there on the Ethereum blockchain that's still locked. And so that's the second one. Well, so what's happened after that? A few things happened. So we've seen an emergence of what I would call a cottage industry when it comes to smart contract validation, verification, checking, auditing, and so on and so forth. And so last year, 2 years ago, there were many consulting companies being formed here, people reading contracts, providing audit reports, tools being created, academic projects as well, and I have a couple of those shown on this slide, something called Scylla and Zoo, and many others also. And so arguably we are somewhat more mature than we were back in 2016 as a community when it comes to creating smart contracts that are not as easily exploited as they were before. Okay, well, so far so good. I think that's not such a bad takeaway. That's not such a bad place to be as a result of some of these disasters. I think we've learned as a community, we've figured out some of the ways and some of the strategies to do better and to kind of proceed forward. Okay. Now, As part of what I do, I also run a reading group when it comes to, which focuses on white papers. So this is something that I run out of UCL, which is a university in London. And so what we do is we spend usually 90 minutes at any given time looking at the white paper and generally criticizing the hell out of pretty much every white paper that we've looked at. So it's a bit of a takedown exercise. And actually, this is not uncommon in a wider community as well. So this is a specific project here, Bancor. This goes back to 2017, so a couple years ago. And this is an example of, somebody, in this case, somebody who is, exceptionally well-informed, Emin Goodsir, who is a professor at Cornell. Basically taking this project apart, if you will, and looking at the different aspects and highlighting a whole bunch of flaws of this project. And so this is kind of how it starts. This is, a snapshot of his blog post. You can see the URL at the bottom here as well. But more specifically, though, if we dig in, we'll see that he highlights a whole bunch of specific issues, about, I think, 25 or 30 specific issues that have to do with many, many aspects of this project. Let me just highlight a couple of these things. So he definitely focuses on issues that have to do with specific implementation bugs in smart contracts. So at the end of that list, you'll see that he highlights a couple of reentrancy bugs, which is definitely a problem, definitely an issue. But it's not only that, right? So he criticizes their on-chain versus off-chain design. He criticizes the need for decentralization. He criticizes, various issues that have to do with their underlying token economics. And so specifically, for example, he's saying here that, the project is effectively executing a central bank strategy for automatically setting a peg for new coins. And then effectively what he claims is that, Bancor as an organization is able to set pricing independently of what the market would otherwise suggest. So, well, what kind of lessons do we learn from here? I mean, one of the lessons here is that when it comes to contracts, smart contracts, and analysis of those, we've, as a community, developed some tools. When it comes to figuring out what's wrong with token economics and issues related to that, or for that matter, decentralization, we can sort of mostly reason about that after the fact, which is sort of a problem, isn't it? Okay. More examples. So this is something from Vitalik's blog back in 2017 as well. So he's looking at a specific project and its fundraising strategy. And of course, fundraising strategies, ICOs and whatnot, have attracted a great deal of attention, but that's kind of the beginning of token economics. It's not the end of it, is it? But in this specific case for MadeSafe, basically they used two independent cryptocurrencies to fundraise, and the rate between those two things wasn't pegged at the time, and that led to problems where essentially some of these participants who converted their BTC to MSC, which is the other coin here, and participated in the sale, basically they were effectively at the end of this process stuck with a 30% loss. And so the lesson here that Vitalik is offering is that running a sale, a token sale in this case, that accepts multiple currencies at a fixed exchange rate is dangerous and bad. And so don't do it. So what is this? What would we call such a thing? Well, if we focus, if we go back to the vast literature that we have on software engineering, that's what's called an anti-pattern. It's the kind of thing you don't do unless you want, trouble to follow. And so as a community, at least when it comes to fundraising, we've seen some anti-patterns being offered, being discussed, and this is kind of nice to have. I think it's a certain sign of maturity. Something else to highlight as well, and maybe this is not as obvious to some of you, but here's the thing, right? So despite hundreds and hundreds of tokens, altcoins, and ICOs that we've gone through as a community, well, many of these projects haven't done so well. And to just kind of understand that point, go to this website, deadcoins.com, and you'll see hundreds of these projects, some of which were direct scams, and others, well, just didn't fare so well. They're trying to behave honestly in many of those cases, but didn't really work out for them. And so there are lots of lessons to be learned there also. Here's another thing. So projects often don't think about the long-term risk of token creation, because again, token creation is not all fun and games. It's not always an upside. Why? Because of this point here in the middle, which is the market will psychologically attach the value of your network to the value of the token, regardless of whether these two should be interlinked. And so if your token is not designed according to robust economic models and realistic projections, you risk devaluing your entire network in the eyes of the market, even if your network is otherwise successful. So this is another warning sign that people should heed here as well. Okay, so I mostly talked about projects from like 2017 or so, like what about here and now? So I want to go through this mini case study, if you will, of a project that's like super recent, right? I think many of you know probably a fair bit about it. So it was in the news in the last several months. This is called Algorand, which is a project that I don't really have any association with. I'm actually quite fond of the technology in many ways, but let's kind of look at it and see what happens. All right, so in fact, yeah, when it comes to technology, there is quite a lot of innovation. So this is a project that came out of MIT. There was a famous founder, Turing Award winner. There was a lot of positive press about this, a great team, and so on and so forth. So lots of excitement about this. So in addition to fundraising through traditional means, these guys decided to do a token sale also. And, or rather, they decided to do something that is a little different. So they decided to go through this auction process. And so every month they decided to run an auction for these tokens called algos. And this kind of specifies, this is from their website, basically specifies what happens to the kind of pricing strategy. And there was an interesting trick there as well, which is to say they promised an up to 90% return in case of a drop in price. And so basically it seemed like a really safe investment vehicle as a result. And well, lo and behold, what happened is this. Back in mid-June 2019, this year, just a little while back, Algorand managed to, as a result of this first ever Algorand auction, raise quite a lot of money on a really humongous valuation. Then this article goes on to talk about the project, MIT, all of those positive connections, all is good and well. And so guess what happened after that? And so after that, within, well, days really, right, weeks, a few short weeks, the price plummets by a significant amount, by over 60%. And, as they say, despite the Turing Award winner backing this project and so on and so forth. Okay, now the plot thickens. So basically, there were quite a number of angry investors who bought into the project, and then they saw their effectively money disappear very, very quickly again. Right? So basically within days of this, and you can read about this, there are really some fun stories if you look at this Medium post there. So some of these investors from China were really quite upset, and you can read about what they're saying, when is alga going to zero and all that kind of stuff. All right, so without getting too much into this, within, again, a very short period of time, August 1st, 2019, this month, Algorand makes a somewhat unexpected move, and it says that, well, remember that 90% refund we promised to you a year from the auction date. If you want to get out and get 85% back, you can do so within the month of August. And this is obviously to please these investors who are, you know, basically yelling at them on Reddit and places and Twitter and places like that. And so effectively this is what happened. Now, I don't think the process is over yet because basically the window will close on August 23rd. So I think maybe they'll announce some of the results very soon. I think maybe possibly within days. But this is an example of something that clearly didn't plan for, did they, right? Otherwise they probably wouldn't have done this in the first place. And so this is what this is kind of describing this alternative. So you can get as an alternative to this 90% back that was previously offered or was previously kind of advertised as part of the auction process. You know, you can now get 80%, 85% back rather within the months of August. Now, it makes the fate of the project as a whole, I would argue, somewhat unclear. Because frankly, I don't know whether they'll have the next auction. I don't know what will happen to the token. I don't know what will happen to the project. If you look at the trajectory of the token, this is what it looks like. You see this kind of significant jump up front back in June, and then the price goes down quite a bit. Now, it looks stable so far, but of course, there is no telling what might happen if they continue with the auction process, or for that matter, if they stop the auction process, because, well, frankly, that's what they advertised in the beginning, right? Well, so lots of questions to be asked here, and I don't think there are too many simple answers. And so, what kind of lessons do we learn here? I mean, I think there are a couple of things to ask for. One is, are there any patterns or potential anti-patterns, like what to do and what not to do, or primitives that we can find in this space? Not only when it has to do with fundraising, but token engineering as a whole. Secondly, what kind of tools should be brought to bear? Just like as we saw in the case of smart contracts, like what tools should we use here? That's the second question. When it comes to primitives, I'm going to go through this fast because we've already heard about both of these, by the way. I only wanted to mention two, which is TCRs, token-curated registries, and bonding curves, curve bonding. So that was the other one. We've seen examples of that in the morning. I don't want to spend any extra time on that, but at least there is a glimpse of some of these design patterns emerging, and I think that's a great thing. Some examples of these things being used, some of them come from the Ocean protocol, as we heard from the previous presenter, and other from projects like EdChain and Messari and so on and so forth. And this is actually a quote from somebody else from the Ocean protocol, basically calling for a discipline of token engineering and comparing it to other kind of engineering disciplines like, I don't know, civil engineering, software engineering, and so on and so forth. And this is what in part inspired my focus on patterns and anti-patterns that are things that we do see in software engineering, and of course we use them to our advantage as well. So to conclude, I wanted to talk about the project, and I don't have any connection to this project. This is called Incentivi, and I think this provides some good motivation for the kinds of things we'll see as part of the workshop later in the afternoon on CatCat and things of that sort, tooling of that kind. But this is a project from 2018. They tried to build a company around this. I'm not too sure whether the company is still around, is still successful, but I think it, again, provides some good lessons in terms of connecting, actually, smart contracts to token engineering. And you'll see how this works in just a second. So essentially the focus here on building simulation and creating agents and basically defining a state space and figuring out reward function and basically figuring out how to optimize that sort of thing. And so I think that's best explained with an example. This is roughly, you know, this is what this looks like. Essentially when it comes to, I mean, this is their slogan, right? So this is effectively a form of A/B testing, if you will, for smart contracts. But again, the focus here is not really as much on the correctness of contracts. It's really on focusing. It's really focusing on economic incentives here. So how does this work? So this is one of their demos. So this is a specific project they've essentially simulated, and there are some assumptions that you can specify, and based on that, you'll basically be able to run these simulations and look at the outcomes. And this is kind of what this environment gives you. And so here are a couple of takeaways to highlight. So they say that given if there's uneven token distribution, it can lead to pump and dump schemes being executed. And so basically the advice here, or the suggestion here is quite clear, which is distribute your tokens more evenly. Okay, so far so good. And so the second takeaway here is that an insurance product where users vote on what claims should be approved needs to increase its bond price so that voters pay for verifying a false claim. And essentially that's kind of another lesson here that comes out of their modeling that consider the case of bribes that come from fraudsters, right? And so this is actually pretty nice. Of course, if you understand the context of this project, if you know what these things mean, and if you can also execute based on this kind of advice, I think these are very, very practical suggestions that you can put into practice before you actually proceed to deploy this project, right? You don't want to find this out once, you know, at a point when it's too late. And here's something else. So this is an analysis of a specific project called the Nexus Mutual System, right? So incentive simulation report. And so this is like a, I don't know, 17 or something like that page report. And this is actually very much reminiscent, at least to me, of basically security audit, right? So when you build a system, it could be as simple as a set of contracts, could be a complex system that's written in C++ for all I care. You invite auditors to look at your system to apply either manual scrutiny or some sort of tools to your code. And typically what results is an audit report. And this is very much reminiscent of that, but this obviously focuses on the token economics that underlies this. And again, this uses tools of simulation to try to predict some of the less than desirable outcomes before these kinds of outcomes are allowed to happen. And I think this is pretty much where I'd like to stop. I'm happy to take one or two questions, but hopefully this motivates some of the things that you'll see late in the afternoon, and hopefully this forms a connection between what we see in both software engineering, but also more specifically smart contracts to the discipline of token economics. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Unfortunately, we are running a bit late in time, but feel free to contact Ben. As mentioned, we have the page tech.io/program. You'll find his talk here, and also a link to his speaker information, and I think your Twitter account. So just reach out, and we will also be happy to share the slides. I think there has been a lot of content on it which might be interesting to you. Sign up for your newsletter, and we will make sure that you will be informed once we are ready to share it. Thanks, Ben.